Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to welcome you all to the Halftime Talk feature interview. I am delighted today to be joined by Dr. Muddasir Quamir, Associate Fellow at the Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analyses in New Delhi. Thanks so much for joining us, Dr. Quamir.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us on Halftime Talk. As you're probably aware, this particular podcast is energy focused, but of course we see a lot of elements playing into that sector these days, not least of which is geopolitics and how that's impacting what's happening in the energy space. And we'll have a focus on India, obviously, today from that point of view. Let's start and talk about, the Ukraine war. That's had obviously an immediate impact on the energy markets last year from a price point of view. But of course, we've seen in the last 12 months how that's impacted energy flows in a very big way. And those are still there. They haven't been reversed as the war has gone on, etc. Of course, India is a huge consumer of oil and gas. And you're one of the nations which has benefited perhaps from discounted Russian oil as one of the bigger consumers and those who are willing to take Russian oil directly. So give us a picture of that, if you like, and how whether you expect that to continue and how the relationship between India and Russia is developing. The Ukraine war has gone on.
Yeah. So first of all, it's true that the Ukraine crisis has impacted the international energy market very, very significantly over the past 1 year. And this impact is both on the supply side as well as on the destination side. From the Indian point of view, if you look at it, the calculations of the Indian policymakers, Indian industries, the Indian oil companies and refineries who are buying oil from outside was very, very transactional, very basic economic business transactional calculation, where they were looking at cheaper oil. Because if you look at the oil market, it's very dynamic. If you look at its impact on the domestic issues, whether economic or fuel prices, the vehicle fuel prices, all of them are affected. So for India to buy cheaper oil from Russia was a very basic business decision to get cheaper oil, and Russia was obviously doing it strategically in terms of offering a big consumer like India cheaper oil. They have been doing it with China as well, the two biggest, buyer of international oil and gas. The other point about India is that, and this is true for some other countries as well, is that they are dependent on external supplies, imports from outside, to fulfill a majority of their requirement for oil and gas. If you talk about India and crude oil, it's almost 60 to 70%. Gas is even slightly higher. So this gives India also an option to diversify its sources, which is what one of the policy which India has adopted over the years as far as the energy market is concerned.
Okay, and of course, the other big supplier to India of energy is the Gulf. And India, of course, has very good and close relations with Gulf oil-producing countries. You could argue have been undercut a bit by these Russian supplies going to India and China. Has there been any, from your point of view, disruption? Has there been any demand from the Gulf countries to sort of control the amount of oil that India takes from Russia? Is it impacting Gulf oil producers' exports to that country?
It's actually the other way around. What is happening today is that Russian oil is not only coming to India directly, but also through other countries. If you take the example of, for example, Turkey, suddenly you would see Turkey is top 10 suppliers of oil to India in the last, over the last 6 months. So basically, Turkey doesn't produce any oil. It is the Russian oil which is coming through Turkey. some of the Gulf countries are also buying oil from Russia and selling it to other countries. So they have actually, in a way, benefited from the shift in Russian oil supplies. And India also is buying from all sources. So directly from Russia, from Turkey, from Gulf countries, the oil produced by them, and also the Russian oil or any other countries which are, supplying through the Gulf countries. And that is something which is possible because of the strategic understanding which India has with the Gulf countries, especially the GCC countries, the 6 GCC countries. There is a very, very significant, you would say, political, strategic, geo-economic understanding which has developed between India and these countries over the years. And this has led to a situation where they do not see the supply of Russian oil to India as a threat, rather they are looking at it as an opportunity.
Okay, I mean, the other part of that is that, India, let's talk a bit about India and China. You mentioned China is the other big consumer that's obviously taking in Gulf oil and Russian discounted oil. India's relationship with the Western economies is very strong in terms of its trading relationship, as its historical relationship. It considers itself a democracy like the West, unlike China and perhaps some other nations. So how is India positioning itself these days in its alignment kind of with China from its Russia policy point of view, but and therefore against what the rest of the West is doing, if you like, with regards to Russia and sanctions, at the same time maintaining its trade and economic relations with the West? And so is it a conflict, if you like? Is that a conflict of interest for it?
There are 2-3 points that needs to be understood if I have to explain this situation. One is the era of alliances from an Indian point of view has come to an end. We are living in a multipolar world order. We are living in an international order which is multipolar, which is multi-vectored, in the sense that every region has a big power around which smaller powers gravitate, but they also are hedging with greater powers to advance their interest. So we are living in a very, very different world from the alliances era, which was there when we saw it during the Cold War and for a brief period after the end of Cold War. That is one point. The second point is that if you look at Indian foreign policy over the years, especially since the 1990s, the end of Cold War, India has adopted a policy of what is defined as multi-alignment. So here, the objective is to have multiplicity of strategic relations with all powers, not just in the neighborhood, but also among emerging powers, middle powers, and great powers. So India, for example, if you look at in the past, India did not really had a very good relations with the United States. But if you look at over the last 2 decades, things have really changed. India now looks at the United States as a strategic partner. And it is the same if you look at from the American point of view. They look at India as a strategic partner. There has been a lot of things going on in terms of, defense talks, in terms of business to business talks, government to government talks, and so on. The same can be said about Russia. The trajectory is slightly different in the sense that Russia, the erstwhile Soviet Union, was a strategic partner of India. There was a brief period when Russia kind of started looking inward, but then after the arrival of Putin, as Russia expanded its foreign policy and international relations, India again kind of started collaborating with Russia on various issues. So if you look at the statistics, the hard statistics, Russia is the #1 defense supplier of India even today, despite of the fact that India looks at the United States as a strategic partner, including in the defense sector.
Well, I mean, 5 years. Let me just interrupt you there. But of course, the stance from Russia to the world has changed significantly in the last year. And yet India hasn't really changed its stance towards Russia. It has remained neutral in this war. Let's talk a bit about the India-China relationship. do you feel that India feels any threat from China's current sort of geopolitical strategy in the Indo-Pacific region? And if it does, what is it doing to allay that, or again, as you said, in this new sort of global geopolitical realignment?
Yeah, India has established itself as a neutral and a player which doesn't want to take sides. That is true. But all this is because India wants to advance its own interest. Now, coming to China and the Indo-Pacific, there is a clear movement towards, the Western or the American-led understanding as far as China is concerned. In fact, I would argue that India's position on China has been able to kind of contributed to the global view on China and understanding China as a threat in the Indo-Pacific and beyond. Because if you look at, let's say, a couple of years back, or even for 3-4 years back, the European countries were not necessarily very sure as to how to look at China and a rising China, whether its Chinese assertions should be looked at only as a benign assertion or should be seen as a threat. But from the Indian point of view, after some of the incidents such as the incidents in Galwan and the Doklam incidents, Indian view of China became very, very consolidated and confirmed as to China being a threat. And it was not only the issue of border problems or skirmishes. What was happening in India's immediate neighborhood, in the Indian Ocean region, in Southeast Asia, in the South China Sea, and a range of issues in this region, in this part of the world, which is now the focus of Indo-Pacific and free and open Indo-Pacific, was something which India has been highlighting for several years. And the view in India, the kind of understanding in India did not happen immediately. It took some time for this view to be consolidated and articulated. And I would say that this has been instrumental in also creating a broader consensus on China.
Okay.
And
okay, that's great. It's helping the world, if you like, form a consensus or understand a bit more about what China's doing. Let's talk about Iran as well, because that's central to the Gulf, where I'm seated. And of course, India has expressed that it wants peace between the Iranians and the Gulf countries and the US for in everyone's interest, and it'll strengthen this Middle East region again as a post against China. How is that? What is India's attitude to that, and how much has it been impacted by the fact that Iranian oil exports, are impeded to a certain extent? How is that impacting its refining strategy, if you like, as well?
I define Iran as a major conundrum in Indian foreign policy. And it's not just about Gulf policy, the larger foreign policy. Iran has been, I would say, a spot in Indian foreign policy where there has been a challenge in terms of how to handle this. Because Iran, if you look at it, Iran is important for India in some ways, but Iran is also a challenge, a strategic challenge, if you would like to say, from Indian point of view. Its importance lies in the fact that India doesn't have access to Central Asia, Afghanistan, and the Caspian region directly because of the obvious, border problems with Pakistan, the conflict and all that. So there is no connectivity. To overcome this, India has always relied on Iran. India has invested in Iran in developing ports such as Chabahar, in building roads and other network infrastructure to try and overcome this problem. But this has, over the last 2 decades, it has faced several problems for obvious reasons, because of the US-China tensions, because of Iran's nuclear issue, because of Iran's militarization of its relationship with the regional countries, be it the Arab Gulf countries or be it Israel, which are again very important partners of India. Israel, as
How
well
do
as the Arab Gulf countries.
Okay, and how do you interpret the recent developments then that we saw this week with China actually mediating between Iran and Saudi Arabia, representing the Gulf states? Is that something that was expected from your point of view? And how do you see that impacting things like the JCPOA negotiations or anything else?
I think it would be, it is too early to suggest that it will have wider implication. We have to wait and see how this unfolds. But certainly from the Chinese point of view, it's a big, one can say big diplomatic win, because they were able to actually showcase that they are really doing something in the Middle East beyond their immediate neighborhood, and they have been able to do it successfully. But if you look at the larger picture, perhaps China joined towards the end. The Iranians and the Saudis have been discussing engaging each other directly and indirectly over the past 2 years, since 2021, basically in Baghdad, and then also through Oman. So this negotiation discussion was going on for some time. And there is obvious reasons for both to engage each other, because you can't change geography.
And what about the US's involvement in that then, in terms of its interest in seeing that relationship warm up, if you like, and resolved, if you like, the problems between them? The US seems to have disengaged from the JCPOA negotiations, maybe for obvious reasons. Iran has a lot of domestic issues that are going on, and but again, how does the US involvement in the region, if you like, has it changed in your opinion in the last year or two, and is that going to remain the case?
If you look at the US, the immediate reaction is that they have welcomed it. But from an American point of view, I think this is really a big challenge. What the US wants in the region is to keep Iran under contained, not allowing Iran to really become a regional hegemon in terms of the Gulf security architecture, the Gulf order. So from that point of view, the reduced US involvement in the maintaining regional security was a major factor, which I think has contributed to the Gulf countries, I'm talking about the Arab Gulf countries, taking things in their own hands, talking to China, talking to Russia, trying to engage with their rivals, whether Iran, or trying to negotiate problems such as Yemen with the Houthis and all that. So all these things actually goes back to how the US has pulled away. I won't say pulled out or has exited the region, but has been restrained, has not been as forthcoming as the Arab Gulf countries would want the US to be. And that, I think, is a major, major problem, because the US has to also focus on Indo-Pacific. It has to pivot it to Asia Pacific or Indo-Pacific. A lot of resources are now engaged in what is happening in Ukraine, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So to be able to maintain that degree of engagement in the Middle East is difficult. And that is where the regional geopolitics is taking new shapes and coming out in different ways. So for US, I think it is a major challenge. China has taken this as an opportunity, and it is trying to prove that it can actually be an alternate power. But I have very, very serious doubts about actually China's ability to deliver in terms of the requirement in the region. But obviously, it has to be, we have to wait and see how things unfold, and what kind of solutions China comes up with.
Yeah, certainly very dynamic times. Dr. Kumar, I wanted to ask you a little about renewables, back to sort of the energy focus and India's renewables ambitions. Obviously, it has its plans. We know what they are. A lot of projects across the board. How I suppose strong is that, given in the context of the year that we've had with energy security? India's had no problem securing its energy, to be fair. from Russia principle, but has its approach to its renewable strategy changed at all in the last 12 months?
The renewables have become a major part of India's energy policy in the last few years. And over the past 1 year or 1 or 2 years, this has been accelerated. If you look at, for example, the National Green Hydrogen Mission, which was unveiled recently, if you look at India's International Solar Alliance, if you look at the efforts at the level of policymakers and industries to try and create greater opportunities for, let's say, the electric vehicles and so on. So it has certainly accelerated. India is trying to diversify not only its sources of energy in terms of from where it is buying energy, but also the sources of energy in terms of what are the fuels it is using. The kind of focus on issues such as climate change, the carbon emissions, and all that. You would have heard about the kind of pollution during certain months of the year, which India, the entirety of North India faces. It is blanketed in fog. So all these things have contributed towards India taking more and more, accelerated steps to increase the contribution of a share of renewables in its energy basket.
Now, and how much does its sort of budget, if you like, or coffers, if you like, influence that? Obviously, India over the last 12 months, even with the discounted Russian crude, has been, facing quite high energy prices, energy costs. That clearly impacts its budget and the money that is left in it, therefore, in the government coffers to spend on these other ambitions. Has that been a challenge at all in terms of balancing the timing of those, continuing those projects, if you like?
No, as a developing country which wants to really accelerate its growth, certainly managing the budget is very, very important. And that is one of the reasons why actually India started looking at Russia as an option to buy cheap oil. But besides, what India is doing is India is allocating specific amounts. For example, the National Green Hydrogen Mission, almost 800 crore in Indian rupees has been allocated for this mission to be invested in capacity building for this mission. So green hydrogen will not only be kind of imported from outside. That is not the only option India is looking at. India is looking at capacity building in terms of ability to produce green hydrogen. Similarly, if you look at the wind energy, solar energy, nuclear energy, India has been trying to enhance its capacity to produce these, energy, so that it is able to, and also hydropowers, for example, that so that it is able to manage this period of transition, energy transition, effectively without necessarily affecting its budget on other developmental needs, other developmental requirements too much. Because India, if you look at in terms of the welfare steps that it has to take for a large population which still remains poor and suffers from poverty. So all these things have to be taken into account. But despite all of these issues, India has continued to be steadfast in its commitment to invest in renewable energy, both in terms of its ability to bring renewable and clean energy from outside, and then in its own capacity building.
And just to wrap up, Dr. Kumar, what's your forecast for Indian GDP growth this year? It's being dubbed as the only economy in the world that's going to have a very positive, if you like, outcome. We've heard numbers as much as 15% growth. Would that be the current consensus?
See, personally, I'm not an economist, so I can't really give my own opinion on that.
No, but I would say what you're hearing there, basically.
Yes. Certainly, I would say that it is certainly what we are hearing in terms of the forecast is certainly on the money. Because why I'm saying this is because the kind of potential, untapped potential for economic growth that is there in India is huge, and that is where the forecast in terms of continued economic growth, GDP growth comes in, despite of the fact that with the Ukraine crisis, with other issues related to geopolitics, the international economy is considered to be or forecasted to be slowing down. That might have some impact on India, certainly. But overall, if you look at the Indian economy, it is very dynamic. There are a lot of untapped potentials, and that is why the forecast, in my opinion, of fast economic growth, I think, are accurate.
Dr. Muddasir Kumar, Associate Fellow at the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analyses. Thank you so much for joining us today on Halftime Talk.
It's a pleasure to join you. Thank you.